Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Swamp Secrets, exposing regulatory dark matter. I am Andrew Langer. I am director of the Center for Regulatory Freedom at the CPAC Foundation. I've also taken on an additional role here with CPAC. I am now the executive director of the Coalition Against Socialized Medicine. I got two things I want to talk about today. One of which has to do with the work that Chasm does and an issue that we've been working on, and I was working on beforehand just in my regulatory work. And then we're going to talk about some numbers I've been running regarding regulation, and hopefully that may turn into an upcoming white paper. But let's start with the emerging issues. This week, as I record this, we are waiting right now for new guidance from the National Institutes for Standards and Technology. You've heard me talk a little bit about this before, but there's a law that's on the books, a 1980 law called the Bayh-Dole Act. This was a revolutionary act, again, passed in 1980, that essentially allowed institutions, research institutions that receive federal funding, like federal seed money for doing research. Before the Bayh-Dole Act, you could not, if you were a research institution, you could not patent any innovations that came out of that research, and as a result, couldn't recoup any further investment that you might do. And Senator Dole and Senator Evan Bayh of Indiana, they recognized that this was stifling innovation. So this act was passed in 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act, and we saw an unprecedented amount of innovation in America, especially when it came to medical devices and pharmaceuticals. Well, the left being unhappy about any kind of innovation and anybody making a profit in anything, well, about 25 years ago, an interpretation of a codicil of the Bayh-Dole Act, something called March In, they were going to move to exploit that in the name of undoing high drug prices, what they thought of as high drug prices. Let me explain what the March In provision is. So, as I said before, if you got federal funding for research, you couldn't patent the innovation that you had achieved. Bayh-Dole changed that, but they said one thing in the act, that if you don't actually use your patent, if you don't explore your patent, you don't license it to someone else, if it lies fallow, as it were, then the federal government could march in and take the patent from you and turn it over to someone who might want to use it. Now, in the 44 years of the Bayh-Dole Act, this has never happened. Why? Because generally people, when they make discoveries, they find ways to use them and innovate them and license them and let other people use them to figure things out. Well, the left has decided that they want to try to use, or decided a long time ago, that they wanted to try to use the March-In provision to deal with what they see as too high drug prices, right? You know, when a drug manufacturer, when they develop a drug, they have a period of exclusivity and they're able to recoup their investment. And so sometimes drug prices might be higher. Then, of course, once they lose that period of exclusivity and a drug is able to be manufactured by a generics manufacturer, then the prices for that drug come down, right? The period of exclusivity allows them to recoup all of the risk that they took in developing that new drug or medical device. And it's funny, we know generics work. We know generics do a good job of bringing drug prices down, but they shouldn't be artificially, or that process shouldn't be artificially instated. So when this theory was announced, brought up, raised 25 years ago, by the way, by one person who, over the course of his career, has been funded by George Soros and received money from the German government for his advocacy work here in the United States. As a subnote, by the way, the House this week, as we record this, is doing a hearing on foreign investment in efforts to undo America's strong intellectual property rights protections. So this person advanced this theory first in 1999 and then again in 2004, and the theory was rejected. But undeterred, despite the fact that the statute doesn't evince this language of using March In for anything other than to deal with patents that lie fallow, this person kept, to use a pun, marching the ball down the field. Here we are in 2024. We have a very friendly administration of progressives. And sure enough, the National Institutes for Standards and Technology announced draft guidance on using March In for just what we've been talking about, using it for this issue of dealing with prescription drug prices. Now, we filed comments, a bunch of other organizations filed comments. So let me add one thing to this. Even Barack Obama's Patent and Trademark Office director, even he said that this is a bad idea in an interview that I did with him a couple of months back. So, there is a bipartisan, nonpartisan, cross-partisan effort to say that this is a bad idea. So right now, while I'm recording this, we are eagerly anticipating guidance from the National Institutes for Standards and Technology on this, final guidance on this. And we are fairly certain that they're going to do the wrong thing, which means we're going to have to challenge it. We're going to have to deal with it right now. What it means is that it will send an immediate signal to research organizations down the road. Don't take federal seed money, which for some research institutions, especially historically black colleges and universities, they depend on to engage in this innovation. And it's going to stifle innovation. And American consumers and, frankly, global consumers are going to suffer as a result of it. So stay tuned for more on that as we await that guidance. We'll have notations on it. I want to turn our attention to something else. I've run some numbers recently. I've spent a lot of time talking about the cost of regulation. Written about it. I have a new blog piece up at CPAC on some numbers that I've run. Because up until about a month and a half ago, I was operating under the assumption that the Biden administration was on the same tempo of growing the regulatory state as the Obama administration was. Under the Obama administration, the cost of regulations grew by about 10% per year, just under 10% per year. I expected the Biden administration to be roughly the same. But then one of our allied organizations came out with some new numbers about the cost of regulations. I did some number crunching as well. And it looks like the Biden administration has increased the regulatory tempo by about 50%, that the regulatory state has been growing by just under 15% per year. Now, at 8%, at just under 10% per year, the Obama administration doubled the cost of regulation. Donald Trump came in, by the way, to give you some context here, again, running those numbers. The regulatory state grew slightly under Donald Trump, but by an average of 1/3 of 1% per year, about as close to zero as we've ever seen for any modern president or any president in the modern regulatory era. Essentially no growth in regulations, 1/3 of 1%. Joe Biden comes into office, and the regulatory tempo jumps up to, as I said, 15% growth per year. What that means is that the regulatory state now costs the American economy just around $3.5 trillion annually. And if it doesn't change, right, this presents the contrasts here. If it doesn't change, the American economy will be at $7.5 trillion in annual regulatory costs by 2030. We're going to do a white paper on this. We're going to do a deeper dive into it because I've thrown in a lot of numbers at you. The point is, these choices matter, and we can change the trajectory of where we go. So stay tuned to the specific regulatory work that we're doing at the Center for Regulatory Freedom. Go check out the work that the Coalition Against Socialized Medicine is doing. I'm Andrew Langer. Have a great week.